On this episode of The Invested Mindset, we're going to be talking about the one big beautiful bill and how it affects investors and real estate entrepreneurs. My podcast was designed for new and seasoned investors and entrepreneurs to help them break free from financial confusion by sharing real-world investing and business strategies. All right, so we're going to be talking about the one big beautiful bill as it has been named, and this has become law, and that was signed into law on July 4th of this year. Now, I got to give a disclaimer. This episode, I'm going to be talking about law, right? The one big beautiful bill is a law. So I'm going to be talking about this law and others as we go through. And I'm also going to be talking a lot about tax code and how this and previous laws have affected taxation in and around real estate. And as I do, my disclaimer is I'm not a lawyer, nor am I a tax professional. Therefore, don't take any of what I say on this episode as actionable, meaning don't take anything that you hear on this episode and go out and do something based on it, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a tax professional. So what I do hope this episode will do, though, is give you some ideas to take back to your financial professional, your tax professional, and say, hey, I heard about this on a podcast. Is there any way that we could implement this in my strategy to save myself some money in taxes legally? And that's really the whole premise of this episode, is to give you some ideas of some ways, some things that you may not have been aware of that would help you to legally reduce your tax liability as you are investing. So with that in mind and understanding that, let's move into the one big beautiful bill. Now, first, we've got to kind of set the stage for this bill, because the very first thing that I would say about it is that it permanently extended all the tax cuts of a previous bill, which is the TCJA, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017, during Trump's first presidential administration. And when that TCJA was passed, it had a sunset provision. Now, a sunset provision, you might understand, is something that is put in a law that says we're going to do this, but we're only going to do it for a certain amount of time. And at the end of that time, we will revert back to whatever it was previous to this law being passed. And, if you've followed me for any length of time, you know that I am a huge firearms enthusiast. And my best example of a sunset provision is the sunset provision that was put in the 1994 assault weapons ban that was passed and signed into law by Bill Clinton. There was a 10-year sunset provision in that law. And thankfully, for those of us that believe in the Second Amendment, at the end of that 10 years, there was not a Democrat in the White House. There was not a Democrat-controlled Congress or Senate. And that bill was just allowed to sunset, and thus started the entire American craze over the AR-15 and other weapons very similar to the AR. So that is an example of a sunset. Now, using that example, because that is an example of a law that was allowed to sunset, meaning the subsequent Congress didn't do anything to stop it. And that's what we could have had with the TCJA. of 2017. Thankfully, we did not. We had a situation where we had a Republican White House, Congress, and Senate, and they said, we are not going to allow this to sunset. We want to make these permanent. And by the way, in the new law, the one big beautiful bill that made all of these things permanent, there is no sunset provision. So that is a very key point to make in the new one big beautiful bill as opposed to the TCJA. There is no sunset provision in the new law. So these are permanent until another Congress comes around and changes any provision in there, and a president at that time would have to sign that into law to change anything in here. It's not going to be automatically sunsetted. So what did the TCJA bring us? Let's start with that, because just to say all those provisions are made permanent, that really doesn't tell us anything if you don't know what those provisions were. So permanently implemented, we have a massive corporate tax cut. And it took the tax from a marginal high of 35%, and then it adjusted down from there based on the corporate earnings to a flat fee of 21%. So there was a huge decrease in corporate tax rate. It also cut the individual tax rate across the board. Now, you're going to hear a lot of people as we have a run up to a midterm election next year. You're going to hear a lot of people on the left try to say that this beautiful bill is not so beautiful because all it did was cut taxes for the rich. That is not the case at all. It cut taxes for virtually everyone across the board, regardless of how much money you make. Now, of course, the people that are going to feel it the most are the people that make the most, because we have a tax regime in place that taxes the rich higher, at a higher rate even than it does other people. So it is not fair to say that it only helps the rich. It helped everybody virtually if you pay income taxes, federal income taxes. It also nearly doubled the standard deduction from $6,500 single to $12,000 single. It increased the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000, doubled it. Now, we just talked about two different things here. We talked about a deduction and we talked about a credit. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't stop right here and let's discuss what is a deduction and what is a credit, because I think there are too many people out there that don't know the difference and could not articulate what either one are. So a deduction is a certain amount of income that the law says you can deduct before you calculate your taxes. Okay? So in the case of the standard deduction, so my first $6,500 of income, I could deduct and not pay taxes on it. Now I can deduct the first $12,000 of my taxes. And that is if I am filing single. Obviously, it's double that if I'm filing married and filing jointly, or close to double if it isn't exactly double. I didn't write it down. But that's a deduction. You just simply take a certain amount of your income, whatever is the allowable deduction, and you deduct it from your income prior to paying that tax rate. Now, we're going to talk about some new deductions that have been passed in the new Big Beautiful Bill. But I want to get that clear. Now, a credit is much different than a deduction. A credit simply means you take that credit right off your tax bill at the end. If you owe $5,000 in federal income taxes when you shake it all out with your tax return, and you have a credit of $2,000, that means you just take that right off your tax bill and now you owe $3,000. That's a credit. So a credit is much bigger than a deduction. Okay. So that's why your credit is doubled from 1,000 to 2,000, but your deduction is almost doubled from 6,500 to 12,000. The deduction isn't necessarily worth as much. Depending on your tax rate, it could be worth very little. If your tax rate is only 10%, right, then that deduction is not worth as much as if your tax rate is at the top, which is 37%. Tax credit doesn't matter. It's worth the same thing to everybody regardless. It's just a credit right against your tax bill. So that's the child tax credit, doubled from 1,000 to 2,000. Now we have a new pass-through deduction of 20% for qualified business income. Now, this is where it may be very helpful for some of you listening to this podcast. Market volatility got you stressed. One day you're up, the next day you're down. It's enough to make anyone lose sleep. That's why smart investors are looking beyond traditional stocks and bonds to diversify their portfolio. What makes ILS Capital different? While stocks and bonds swing with market emotions, our investment funds are backed by real estate notes, actual loans secured by real property. This means your investment isn't tied to Wall Street sentiment or corporate earnings reports. Instead, it's connected to tangible assets that people need, homes and commercial buildings. Real estate notes have historically provided more predictable returns because they're based on actual property values and loan payments, not market speculation. It's a completely different approach to building wealth. Ready to add some stability to your investment strategy? Visit ILS Capital at ilscapitalfunds.com/diversify. That's ilscapitalfunds.com/diversify. And learn how our real estate notes-backed funds can help balance your portfolio. Investment involves risks, including potential loss of principal. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Please carefully consider investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses before investing. There is a new pass-through deduction, 20% for qualified business income. Now, this is income that could be derived from sole partnership, partnerships, S-corps, and you'd have to go into what is qualified business income. So it is not a W-2 income. It is not passive income from, say, buying a real estate note or writing a real estate note. Interest income typically is not going to be qualified. It's got to be something derived from a trade or business. Okay, that's the key word. It is income derived from a trade or business. There are also some professions that are exempted from being able to use this QBI deduction. And examples of those might be an attorney. I believe that is an exempted business. So an attorney is in a trade or business, but has not been allowed by this law to use this QBI deduction. And then here's a big one. The estate tax was doubled to $13.99 million per individual. Now, this is all the things that were done in the first Trump tax cut in 2017. But all of these have now been made permanent. There was also a lowered interest deduction from 1.1 million to 750,000. Now that's a lowered interest deduction. That's going the wrong way for taxpayers. Okay, we don't really like that because we're not able to deduct interest that we're paying above 750,000 now, and it used to be 1.1. So all the other ones went the right way for the taxpayer. That one kind of went against the taxpayer. And all of those were in the TCJA of 2017. Now let's move to the new bill, the one big, beautiful bill signed into law July 4, and it changes the estate tax again and increases it to $15 million from $13.99, which was up double from what it was prior. Now, here's the interesting thing, though. This time, It also has a provision that it is adjusted for inflation going forward. Now that's beautiful, because $15 million exemption today from the estate tax would not be the same as what $15 million exemption would be 3 years from now, 2 years from now, or 12 years from now. But now we have an inflation adjustment in that estate tax exemption. So every year, we would presume that number will get higher and higher and higher. The next thing is the standard deduction that was doubled from 6,500 to 12,000. It has been increased again to 16,000 and 32,000 married filing jointly. And there's also another new provision that you get another 4,000 if you are over 65 years old. So from 2016 to now, we've seen that standard deduction go from 6,500 to 12,000 to 16,000, and an additional 4,000 added to it if you are over the age of 65. Now, I talked about the QBI deduction that was introduced during the old 2017 law. We have a change to that QBI. It is increased from the 20% that was given in 2017 up to 23%. Now, in order to qualify for this, a couple of things, just like everything government giveth, there are strings attached, and it can taketh away as well. So to qualify, you have to make below $163,300 single, or $326,600 married filing jointly. So if you are above that, then this QBI really is not going to help you, in my opinion, of how I've read this. Again, it's certainly still worth having a conversation with your tax professional in case I am reading that incorrectly. Child tax credit. It has we've been given an additional $500 per child on that, and that is in place till 2029. Now, let's talk about that, because there we have a sunset. We have a sunsetting of the additional $500 child tax credit. Why would Congress put that in there? Why would they put a sunset in there for that additional $500? I can assure you they wanted to leave it in permanent, but they didn't leave it in permanent. Why is that? It's because they wanted it to score a certain way with the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. And if they had left it on indefinitely, CBO would have looked at this over a 10-year period, and they would have said, it's going to cost you this much over 10 years. As it is now, with the sunsetting in 2029, CBO can only look at it to 2029 and say, this provision, this one little provision of this beautiful bill is going to cost you X. Now, if it is increased later, prior to the sunset in 2029, that will be scored separately and differently going forward. So if you're wondering why they put these little sunset clauses in, it's because they want to be able to say this bill is only going to cost us X. And they have to look at it over a 10-year period. Next up, we have 529 plans. These are plans that you can put qualified money in for children's college education. And these have been expanded to all schooling, not just college. So these have now been expanded to, you could use it for elementary school, homeschooling, and most expenses are covered, most schooling expenses. So that's a big expansion on the 529 plan. Charity, up to $5,000 tax credit if you give to charities that provide for K through 12 scholarships. That's an interesting one. That's new. And then we have the Trump accounts, as you might hear them called. These are accounts for children under the age of 8 years old. You can give up to $5,000 a year into these accounts, adjusted for inflation, and the cap gains rate, if used after age 18 for qualified expenses, which are higher education, apprentice credentials, start a business, purchase a residence, a principal residence. This is interesting. So these Trump accounts, these children accounts, could be used for starting a business, getting credentials for apprenticeship in the trades, or use it for higher education or purchase of a principal residence, down payment money, basically. Now, and in a pilot program added to these Trump accounts, it provides for $1,000 tax credit for births from 2025 after January 20th all the way to 2028. Now, let's look at these last few things here in totality. We've got a child tax credit, additional credit of $500. Then we've got an expansion of 529 plans to include a lot of things it never included. A charitable tax credit for charities that give K through 12 scholarships, and then the Trump accounts for children under 8 years old. All these things are really pointing towards putting money aside for children. Now, why in the world? I like to look at the why behind things. Why would there be in this one big beautiful bill such a push towards getting money put aside for children? In a variety of ways, but most generally, these are for education. There are some other things, start a business, principal residence, etc. But by and large, most of this is really geared toward education. And I'll tell you the why. And you won't find it in the bill, and you won't find it in most of the things that you're going to read about the bill, most of the things you're going to hear about the bill. Picture this. You found the perfect investment property. The numbers work, the location is ideal, but your traditional bank wants 60 days to close and treats your rental property like it's some risky gamble they've never seen before. Sound familiar? Here's the thing. Most banks just don't understand real estate investing. They're built for home buyers, not investors. And that's where Investor Loan Source comes in. We're a financing company created specifically by and for real estate investors. We know what rental income looks like. We understand fix and flip timelines, and we get that commercial deals move fast. Whether you're doing buy and hold rentals, fix and flip projects, or commercial acquisitions, we speak your language and we can close in days, not months. Stop explaining your business to bankers who just don't get it. Visit ils.cash/fast. That's ils.cash/fast, and work with lenders who understand real estate investing. Our Congress and our current president are showing in this bill an acknowledgement of a huge economic problem in America. And that problem is that we have a very low, what's called fertility rate in this country. In 1960, the United States had 3.65 births per woman. That is the tracking that we use, that's the methodology to use to decide whether we are above replacement threshold or not. We count how many births per woman occur, and we don't count that birth until that child has reached 15 years old. And in 1960, we had 3.65 births per woman. That's what we call the fertility rate. 1970, it had dropped to 2.48. 1980, it dropped to 1.84. Then it bounced back up in 1990 to 2.08, and 2000, 2.06, 2010, 1.93, 2020, 1.64, and the latest numbers we have is 2022 at 1.66. Now, that's a huge problem, and the problem is because the threshold for replacement is 2.1. We have not been above replacement on an annual basis. Now, I just looked at the numbers every decade. I didn't look at every year. But you've got to go clear back to 1970 in the United States to find a number above 2.1 if you are looking on the even 10-year years. 1970, we were at 2.48. After that, 1980 and beyond, we've been below the 2.1 replacement rate. That's a huge problem. And if you want to dig into that, I'm not going to dig into it today. I just wanted to point it out because I thought it was interesting that so many provisions in this new bill were aimed at trying to incentivize parents to have more kids. And you could do a deep dive on this and we could talk about it for hours. It is a huge economic problem for the United States going forward if we don't turn it around. And there is certainly no data to suspect that it is going to turn around anytime soon. If you look at the world fertility rate, we are expected to peak in 2080 and precipitously fall after that. So that's a scary rabbit hole. If you want to dive into that, go down that rabbit hole. But that is why I believe there is so many provisions in this bill. Now, is that going to make a difference? Really? Are these little tax incentives and credits and charitable contributions and things like that going to incentivize a couple to have another child? I hardly think so. I would think that this is maybe misplaced effort on the part of our political class, but nonetheless, that's where it is, and that's what it is. The next provision that we were given in this new bill, an auto loan interest, $10,000 deduction, but it's phased out if your AGI, your adjusted gross income, is above 149,000 single or 249 married filing jointly. Tips and overtime, that has been talked about ad nauseum, and but that again has a sunset provision of 2029 on it because of the reasons I stated earlier. Now, those are general provisions that, kind of affect everybody. But now let's get more specific in the provisions that pertain to real estate or investing in general. Now, the first one is the low-income housing tax credit. And this is designed to make it easier to develop affordable housing apartments. And if you are in that business or you're thinking about getting in the affordable housing business, whether it is rehabbing or building new construction ground up, I'm not sure what this covers. I didn't do a deep dive in it, but if you're in that business, it's certainly worth taking a look at, doing a deep dive on to see if a couple of tweaks to your business might allow you to qualify for some of these things. Expanded opportunity zones. Now, this is an interesting one. The opportunity zones have been, by and large, at least in Washington's opinion, a success. These were created quite some years ago. And if you just Google opportunity zone map, you can pull up a very good graphic that shows you what areas close to you or what areas in your markets that you invest in qualify as opportunity zones. And these are going to be either areas that are underdeveloped or rural areas. I guess you could call that underdeveloped too, possibly. But in these poorer areas, you're going to find most of those opportunity zones. Not all. It's interesting. Some of the opportunity zones that I found, I'm like, really? How did that qualify? But at any rate, they are expanded, the opportunity zones. And if you purchase a qualifying property in one of these opportunity zones, now, again, like all things government, there are strings attached. Don't just go out there with your normal LLC and grab up a property because you saw it was in an opportunity zone. You've got to speak to some folks that are familiar with those and set up an opportunity zone fund to purchase that opportunity zone property in. And you can't just purchase any old property. It's got to be specific type of property, and it has to be used for either construction or substantial renovation. So take a look at that, because those opportunity zones have been expanded. This is my favorite probably of all of it. Bonus depreciation. Bonus depreciation, 100% for qualified property, equipment, improvements to commercial real estate. Wow, that one sure speaks to me. So, what does 100% bonus depreciation mean? It means that for a property, now here are a couple of keys. These are keys. Properties that were purchased and placed in service, keywords, and placed in service after January 19, 2025, you may qualify for 100% bonus depreciation. Now, look, most of us that are in commercial real estate, we understand that bonus depreciation is a good thing. So we use something called cost segregation studies or cost segregation analyses to dice up the value of a piece of commercial real estate so that we can depreciate that faster. We don't want to wait 39 years to get our depreciation on a property. We want to use those bonus depreciation methods and get it faster. So by using a cost segregation analysis, which, by the way, I think the cost seg guys out there are going to be swamped going forward doing these studies. Because if you don't understand what a cost seg is, it's real simple. A trained professional goes to your property and they make a list of all the components that make up that property. Now, the first thing they do is they say your land, just the land value alone, is only worth X. So we're going to take that off the board because you cannot depreciate land. The IRS does not believe land depreciates, so you can't depreciate that. However, everything else on that land has a lifespan. It has some lifespan, and that span is dictated by IRS code. So if you look at the building itself, the structure, that might have a lifespan of 39 years. If you look at the HVAC units, the heating and air conditioning units, those might have, and I say might because I don't know the code. I don't know all of these sections by heart, but maybe that has a lifespan of 7 years or 8 years. And then maybe the roof on that, well, it doesn't have a 39-year lifespan, so maybe it has a 15-year lifespan. And this cost seg analysis is going to dive into this entire property and dice it up by segment, and it's going to categorize it and say you could deduct this amount of value in 7 years, and this amount in 15 years, and this amount in 39 years, and the land, you can't depreciate at all. And that's basically what you're going to have. Well, that gives you the ability to put those on accelerated schedules on your tax return so that you are taking much more deduction in those earlier years of owning that commercial asset, as opposed to deducting the land and then depreciating everything else, all the rest of the value over 39 years. Because without a cost seg study, that's basically what you'd be doing. So now we get to deduct all these deductible things much faster. Instead of putting them on these schedules for 7 years and 15 years and so forth, 100% qualifies on qualified property, equipment, improvements to commercial real estate. So this is one that you really want to talk to your tax professional about. Again, I'm not a professional. Don't take anything I say here as actionable, but I can tell you I'm having discussions already with our CPA, and we are discussing how we can implement this in our portfolio to purchase more real estate. And here's the thing that I saw in a couple of analyses we did on a couple of properties that were available for us to purchase. We were able to deduct in the first year almost enough to cover the down payment of the property. It was in these two examples that we ran for ourselves, it was almost stupid of us not to buy those properties. Now, we're still doing the analytics. We have not bought them. We have not even made offers yet on them. We're still doing the due diligence, but we are definitely moving forward with that due diligence at warp speed, because it appears to me that with this bonus depreciation on the right asset, again, not every asset is going to come out that way, but on the right asset, it may behoove you to buy good properties at good prices. Look, don't let the tax tail wag the investment dog, okay? That is not what I'm saying here on this podcast. And I know so many people that do that. So let's stop and think about this for a moment. Because you can deduct something, because you can get a tax break, because you can pay less in income taxes, does not negate doing your due diligence on the actual investment itself. The investment is the most important equation in this whole thing. The tax consequence is secondary to that. But I know so many investors and so many people in real estate that allowed the tax strategy to dictate what investments they make. And that is just so foolish, because I see so many people make bad business decisions, make bad purchases based on that theory. And one case in point is the 1031 exchange. I despise the way the 1031 exchange is set up, because it incentivizes you to sell an asset and buy an asset quickly in quick succession in order to qualify for this deferred cap gains tax. And I see so many people making foolish purchases just so they can kick that capital gain tax down the road. So don't let the tax tail wag the investment dog. Okay, the investment is the most important part. But all that being said, this is certainly worth a conversation with your tax professional to see how you could implement this bonus depreciation and maybe help you build your portfolio a little faster than you would have otherwise. All of these things have been made permanent unless I mentioned a sunsetting. So that's in a nutshell, the big, beautiful bill and how it affects us going forward. Now, all that being said, and by the way, a lot of these provisions are retroactive back to January 20 or January 19 of this year. And we're starting to see some effects from this bill already. And in a Fox News article, July 23rd, just last week here, the Treasury Department counselor Joe, I'm going to butcher his last name, Lavorgna, was quoted as saying, we have evidence that business capex, that is business capital expense, is up 16.6% in the first half of 2025. Business equipment production is up 23% for Q1, 11% for Q2, from a negative of negative 17% annualized. This is the strongest numbers we've seen in 28 years since Q3 and Q4 of 1997. Now, as this bill has been bantered back and forth, started in the House, went to the Senate, back to the House, then to the President, and there has been a ton of talk in business news about this bonus depreciation and it going to 100%. Last year, it was 80%. This year, it was 60% prior to the law. So if you're caught in January prior to the 19th, you're at 60% during that small, less than a month window. But after that, now it goes to 100%. And you're seeing supply side economics at work here, because when these tax cuts and exemptions were put in place or even talked about, businesses started taking advantage. So we'll certainly watch those numbers to see that trend continue, and I certainly would expect it to do so. And by the way, just for whatever it's worth, this works hand in hand with the tariffs that we talked about on the last episode. The tariffs were in place for a multitude of reasons, but one particular reason was to onshore American jobs, create American jobs, and stop the flow of American manufacturing going overseas and reshore some of what has already gone overseas. Now we have this bonus depreciation that says to businesses and investors, go do business, go expand, go start a factory, go build a factory. And all these incentives are now in place and lined up. So this is going to be really, really interesting. Some of the things that were tariffed, if you think about that and how it plays into this tax bill, energy, steel, minerals, factories, data centers, AI, all of this is set to take advantage of this one big, beautiful bill. Whether you like it, you don't like it, I can tell you it's certainly going to invigorate business in this country. Now, the thing I don't like about it is what it does to the debt and deficit. And we've spoken about that on previous episodes, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse. However, I think if there is a bright side to that, it is fueling the economy and bringing all of this investment activity back to the United States. And we'll see if all this plays out or not. It's a gamble, and we'll see. That's it for this episode on the One Big Beautiful Bill, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining us on The Invested Mindset. To continue receiving actionable wealth building strategies, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure you turn on the auto download to ensure you never miss an episode. And if today's insights moved you closer to financial freedom, please take a moment to leave us a rating. It helps fellow entrepreneurs and investors discover these wealth building strategies for themselves. I'm Tom Berry, and I'll see you next time as we continue building a path to lasting wealth and freedom.